the entire flow of the Moskva River. Its ambitions didn't end there. Moscow continued to expand its borders through its wealth rather than warfare. Its tactic was to buy land from bankrupt rulers, acquiring entire towns and villages in the process. As Moscow was still a vassal of the mighty Mongol Empire, it had to send envoys to pay them tribute. And Moscow's ever-expanding borders meant more and more revenue for the Mongols. But not everyone was content with the rise of Moscow. As Moscow grew in power and influence, its Grand Prince, Dmitry Ivanovich, reinforced its vulnerable defenses. Its wooden fortress, the Kremlin, was rebuilt. This time, in stone. But even stone walls didn't deter its enemies. By 1368, Lithuania saw rapidly expanding Moscow as a real threat. Joining forces with the Principality of Tver, they set out to challenge its dominance. They attacked Moscow. But the stone walls held, and the enemy retreated. Tension between the factions refused to die down. In 1370, Moscow marched on territories belonging to both Tver and Lithuania, igniting a full-blown war. Years of bloody conflict ensued, until Moscow's Grand Prince Dmitry Ivanovich finally defeated both enemies. Yet Moscow was still a vassal of the Mongol Empire, which still demanded tribute. Moscow must keep up the payments or face retribution.
Mic on.
I got a hair or something. Look at my freaking nose. We go.
Trade routes between Rus settlements supported a vibrant economy, which in turn allowed Moscow to pay forward tribute to the Golden Horde. If Moscow was to avoid a Mongol attack, Dmitry would have to meet the Horde's tribute demands before the Khan's patience expired.
Mega Monner. The tribute payments. Big gold.
Moscow's primary means of raising the taxes demanded by the Horde was through trade with nearby Rus towns. But Prince Dmitry would have to keep his traders safe from raids by opportunistic bandits that stalked the countryside. While Moscow's trade was strong, Dmitry could bolster his income if he could locate additional trade partners.
Велить, что делаете.
Готовы идти.
Опасно есть! Наказывай, еду.
Каков наказ есть? Отходим!
Задницей готови суть. Ладно, есть.
Торгуем!
В заднице надобно есть ищи. Уразумел.
Люди, служите готове! Построено будет. Работа ждет. Радуйся. Торгую.
Лук готов есть. Наказен обрежь бой.
Позоротай готов есть. Скачу, куда велено есть. Поскору.
Рада есть. Чего делать и надобно? Начну, трудитесь. Люди здесь дело есть.
Trade routes brought wealth, but safe passage was not a given with bandits stalking the
Построено
roads.
будет. Готовы идти? Сие мне нравится. Сделано добро есть. Я построю сие.
Исполняйте. Стреляю в ворога. Готов, трудитесь есть. Каков наказ есть? Торгую. Люди здесь вот. Исправите надо так.
Приуготовляйте копия! Есть! Копейщик есть!
Бойни, на брань уготовляйтесь!
Готовы, трудитесь есть. Начну, трудитесь.
Increasing Moscow's income required locating additional trade partners. To do so, the Muscovites needed to scout the land in search of new settlements.
Стрела на тетиве есть.
Двигаюсь!
Радуйся.
Okay, so we got guilds. This is like same map,
Наказе суть.
but
Исправляйтесь. Готовы будет, надобно в путь идти. Напряжь.
Лихо есть!
Радуйся.
Работа ждет.
Ворог! Нападают! Опасно есть! Готово есть.
Ага, иду уже. Исполняйте. Течем. Наказе суть.
Еда есть! Порох
Дело сделано есть.
есть!
Приуготовляй, наказе будут.
As the deadline for payment of tribute approached, Dmitri had to quicken his efforts to collect the necessary taxes.
Я построю тебе.
Стреляют!
With the Golden Horde paid, the Muscovites could concentrate on expanding their territory until the next payment was due.
Еда есть! Порох прийде!
Слушайте, надобно есть.
Внемлите наказу моему. Надобно есть. Идем.
Стреляют в нас!
Воины, на брань уготовляйтесь. Готовы будете, воины.
Optional just for the basic units.
Возродайка, направляемся!
As Moscow grew in riches, the Khan continued to demand taxes. If Dmitri did not pay, he would face the swift vengeance of the Horde.
Исправляйтесь.
As Prince Dmitri sought to increase Moscow's power, he turned from trading with his neighbors to purchasing their lands outright.
Глядите.
If he owned the surrounding lands, Moscow would be the dominant center of Rus' power, and Dmitri would be secure as Grand Prince.
Готове будь дело, сделано есть.
Muscovite scouts located the town of Susdel, and trade could begin. But more traders on the roads
Готовы суть.
meant an increased threat of bandit raids. Before he could purchase the settlements, Dmitri needed to prove he could provide safe passage for the traders and their goods.
Приуготовляйтесь все.
Яко делать.
Уразумел.
Actually,
Слушайте, исходим. Люди здесь в наказе будут. Идти надо. Чего делать и надо? В наказе будут.
the other two.
Начну трудитесь.
Of
Рад. Лучник готов есть.
Люди ждут наказы. Да.
not pulling them.
Добро есть!
Буду древо рубите. Я здесь.
Ополчение есть.
Ворон!
Стрела на тетиве есть. Лук готов есть. Какая здесь суть? Ладно, есть.
The hell?
Слушай наказ, Нож. Брать замер! Исправляйтесь.
With safe passage established, Dmitri could now purchase his first settlement.
Глядите, воины.
The small settlement at Perislav welcomed Muscovite scouts and the prospect of trade.
Идите! Лучник готов есть.
The hell? Why?
Дворевник, направляемся.
Слушайте.
No, I already got a mark yet.
Есть. Начну трудитесь.
Люди, служите, готовы.
Меня бьют! Готовы. Ходейщицы в ряде. Сделаю.
Воины, исправляйтесь.
Приуготовляйтесь все. Копейщик есть. Я построю сие.
Сие мне нравится.
Ополчение есть.
There's confusion.
Рады есть.
Яко делать.
Копейщик есть. В наказе будут. Идти надобно.
Радуйся.
Чего делать и надо? Уразумею. Готов, если. Брань будет. Исправляйтесь. Слушаюся. Слушайте все. Будем сражаться.
They have their route set up for a while now.
Радуйся. Начну трудиться. Есть. Кто стреляет? Готово есть.
Воины, исправляйтесь.
Военный готов есть.
Gold here.
Исправляйтесь!
With tribute now overdue, Dmitri had only a brief window to pay the Mongols.
Готовы идти. Построено будет.
Слушай наказ. Готово есть. Приближайтесь, опоясли!
Готов трудитесь.
Меня поражают!
The Khan once again demanded taxes from the growing Rus provinces.
That's
But this time, the price to keep the horde at bay was higher than ever before.
Радуйся! Лихо есть!
Дело есть.
Лук готов есть.
Dmitri purchased the lands of Troitsky and extended Moscow's power. The town would now generate gold without the need for taxing traders.
Добудьте древеса, надобно?
Исправляй. Делаю, что велено есть. Радуйся!
there's always a field for you to work in, brother.
Готов трудитесь есть.
Слушайте.
Велить, что делать.
Буду купать.
Воины, исправляйтесь! Люди, служите готове. Наказе суть. Браньте!
Жаловать еще нельзя.
Готове будете, воины. Готов, если наказы исполнять.
I don't think I'm gonna pay his ass this time. Yes, sirree.
Возвратай, скачу куда... Ворог близ стоит!
Hold on.
Ага,
Blue down.
ладно есть. Стреляю! Беда есть! Ворог придет! Двигаемся! Поскору!
Bastards.
Воины, надо идти.
Сделано будет.
Find the valley.
Сила на тетиве есть.
The village of Kalin was ready to trade with Moscow.
Ополчение есть.
Moscow's power grew as it absorbed the lands around Kolunma. Bandits remained a threat on the roads, however.
Начну трудитесь.
Готовились мы, двигайтесь от задницы.
Ополчение есть!
Готовы трудитесь и есть.
Really just selling off the trade route.
Готово есть! Кто стреляет? Люди, служите готовы!
Наказе нові суть. Напряж по скору.
Наказ будет. Люди здесь суть.
Oh, get my own patrols, please.
Kerisler welcomed Dimitri's envoys and the coming of Muscovite traders. When Dimitri's men located Vladimir, they opened another revenue stream for the Grand Prince.
Повинуюся!
Направляюся.
Сделай!
Need more time.
Какови накази суть. Двигаюся.
Shit.
Стой, стой. Слушайте все.
This group's not too. Where are the others at the north? Oh, one's already up there. Pretty good.
Як угодно есть.
Исполняйте наказе суть!
Идем в бойни.
There.
Готов, если...
Работа ждет. Начну трудитесь.
Воїни, на браню готовляйтеся!
There.
Грядите, воїни!
There's a cat. Okay. So I can take multiple communications inside.
Воїни, надо идти! Ополчение есть!
Is there any food faster than wood now?
Люди, служите готове. Работа ждет. Я построю все.
Воїни, исправляйтесь! Глядите! Течем! Приступаем! Воины, на броню готовляйтесь!
Yes.
Чего делать надо вновь?
Just so many of them.
Лучник готов!
Готовитесь, латницы! Латницы, наступайте!
Готовы будете, воины! Приступаем! Кто стреляет? Готово есть!
На казинове суть! Огонь, брат!
1900, are you fucking kidding me?
Слушайте, сделано будет! Уразумер!
Are you freaking kidding me?
Исполняйте!
Moscow absorbed the lands around Susto, extending its power.
Я здесь. Готовы, трудитесь и есть. Построено будет.
Слушай наказ. Будем сражаться!
Лучник готов есть. Стреляю.
Get in first. And you might actually stand a chance. Oh my warrior. Shoot.
Соглашаюсь.
Quick right there.
Соглашаюсь.
Just fall to it.
Чего делать и надобно?
Исправляйтесь. Глядите. Идем, бойни!
I don't know the frickin' band I can't.
Кто стреляет? Меня подождают! Ворог близ стоит!
Oh, what the hell?
Готов, если наказы исполняйте. Слушай наказ, но... Сделано будет.
Исправляйтесь, делайте. Меня бьют! Готове будете, бойни. К оружию готовы, суть. Есть. Борцы, як делать? Что делать надо было?
В наказе будут.
That's the way you know frickin' band I can't.
Исполняйте. К оружию готовы, суть.
Where are these northern attacks coming from?
Брать будет. Брать завет!
Стреляют в нас! Наказе суть. Соглашайся! Войне, надо найти! Порази! Исправляйтесь! Меня поражают! Зачем?
Приуготовляйтесь все. Собираю древеса.
Almost 2100. I've got 4 minutes to pay him. What the hell, man?
Я здесь. Начну трудитесь.
Where will my guard go?
Лучник готов. Иду! Зрёба и мочима! Лучник идет. Приказывай. Понял.
На Казинове суть. Брань завет! Дело есть худо! Слушайте все! Приближайтесь, боязливее! Слушайте все! Уразумев!
Исправляйтесь. Идем в бойни! Меня поражают!
Дело есть, наказе будут. Да? Я построю сие.
Кто стреляет?
Frick.
Брань будет. Будем сражаться! Следуй наказам! На Казино слушаюся. Готов есть. Двигаюся. Иду напрямик. Слушай наказ, но. Я готов. Будет сделано. Слушай. Меня поражают!
Jeez.
Лук готов есть. Рцы яко делайте.
Grab that gold.
Ладно, есть.
With the gold he had raised, Dmitri purchased Paraslav outright. With an exchange of gold, Dmitri secured the loyalty of the rulers of Kerisler. With the surrounding principalities under Dmitri's sway, Moscow was now the preeminent power among the Rus. The time was coming to throw off the Mongol yoke. Medieval Moscow, Muscovy, was shielded by vast forests, which slowed the advance of approaching enemies. These woodlands were also an abundant source of timber for building wooden forts. Forts built within urban settlements were called Kremlins. The original Kremlin in Moscow, from at least the 12th century, was made entirely from wood, as were all buildings in the city. To understand how these forts were constructed, a scaled-down version is being made.
Moscow built forts in vast numbers. You can see they had an ingenious way of doing it. These standard lengths of wood have V-shaped notches cut into the end, and then they can be simply overlaid into a box construction which forms a cell. No joints, no nails, just the sheer weight will keep them in place.
Stacked together both vertically and side by side, these cells created astonishingly resilient walls. They were far better at withstanding attacks from mighty siege engines than simple vertical palisades. And the box construction of Muscovy forts also had a number of other advantages.
By filling them with earth or with stone, it made them not only stronger than a single wooden palisade, but it also gave them sturdiness and elasticity, which could better absorb the impact of projectiles from trebuchets. And the other advantage of these box structures is that they could be prefabricated. Now, the first step in that process is taking off the bark.
This stops wood-eating insects from sheltering beneath the bark and allows the wood to dry, preventing it from rotting.
By taking off the bark, this wood will then last for years.
Prepared timbers could be stored and then assembled into cells, wherever and whenever needed. And some cells, both on the walls and the gatehouse towers, were not filled with earth. Instead, they were left empty, for defenders to use. From the 13th century, some towers were made of stone and brick, like this one at Chertsk Castle,
Nice.
built in 1388.
Ooh, they even got
When
the dark
stone
wood
wasn't
decoration.
available locally, red brick was the material of choice. Of course, the advantage of using bricks is that they're easy and cheap to manufacture, they're uniform, so easy to build with, and it's these red bricks which give the distinctive look to Eastern European castles, which we can still see to this day.
Stone and brick towers could be built much taller than wooden ones. This allowed Moscow's defenders to spot potential attackers sooner, keeping their enemies at bay. Under Grand Prince Dmitri, Moscow had grown rich and allied itself with old adversaries. Together, the Rus allies were ready to challenge the dominance of the Mongols and stopped paying them tribute. On the banks of the River Don, Dmitri would stake his life on being the first Rus leader to defeat the Horde in battle.
Ooh. One second. Alright, gonna run the dog out. Whoa. Where's like... Where's India's campaign? Hmm.
Arriving at Kulikovo, Prince Dmitri and his army would rendezvous with allied forces from all principalities loyal to Moscow. Together, they would challenge more than a century of Mongol dominance. Before the battle, Dmitri would recruit soldiers from nearby villages. He would also ride to his allies, who were awaiting their battle orders.
Возротай, готовить... Возротай! В путь!
Приготовляйтесь, а наказы исполняйте.
Куда направить?
Приготовляйтесь, воины! Обрез! Ворог ожидает! Приготовляйтесь, идем!
Коня Сева, возротай, наказы ждут. Добро есть.
Monastery, eh?
Возротай, готови наступать. Исполняй. Возротай, двигайтесь и напрежь.
Dmitri delivered the battle orders to his allies. They would take up position on the Smolka river fords and ready themselves for the enemy's arrival.
Живу службы ради.
Куда направляйтесь? Путь!
Ridiculous path. Eventually ending back.
Сие есть долг мой.
Oh, look at that.
Вовсе на подошву на них!
That's all random. Oh, cool.
Готовы будете, воины! Приготовляйтесь, а наказы исполняйте. Поведу вы.
The villagers pledged all the soldiers they could spare, strengthening Dmitri's position against the horde. With a loyal army assembled, Dmitri began the march north to meet the enemy in battle.
Идти надо. Сейчас служите рад, если.
Возротай, готови наступать! Возротай, скачите купно! Слушайся!
Where are you, puddles?
Да! Возротай, наступаем!
I think that. Oh. There.
Возротай, будете надобно!
Dmitri would oversee the battle with his own detachment of fighters, moving to support any ford crossing that seemed at risk of being overwhelmed. As Mongol war drums sounded through the fog, Dmitri and his men steeled themselves for the arrival of the horde.
Время. Исполнено будет! Повинуй!
The Rus were emboldened by this first small victory and stood firm on the Smolka River, ready for the enemy's next attack.
Держать крепость во что бы то ни стало!
Civilians from the province, although unable to fight, vowed to construct defenses for Dmitri should he need to fall back from the northern fords.
Приготовляйтесь, воины! Ладно, есть. Посмотрите, оружие! Наступай!
Dmitri's allied villages had finished constructing a line of defenses, which Dmitri could choose to fall back to if he lost the fords.
Воины наказа ожидают. Приготовляйтесь, а наказы исполняйте. Долг несть бремя. Оружие готовите! Наступаем! Приготовляйтесь, идем! Посмотрите, оружие, наступаем! Долг несть бремя!
Okay. We can totally separate it, but I just...
Dmitri and his Rus allies held the fords and eliminated the Mongol vanguard. While the enemy regrouped after the initial skirmish, the prince ordered the Rus to fall back to the hilltop defenses behind them.
Выступайте доблестно, воине!
As they retreated, nearby Rus provinces mustered additional forces to Dmitri's side. The Rus discovered a new settlement, which pledged its soldiers to Moscow's cause.
Приуготовляйтесь, копейщицы!
Копейщицы, наступайте!
Yeah, but
Копейщицы, приуготовляйтесь к брани! Храбрейшие копейщицы, приуготовляйтесь! Держите копья ровно! Приуготовляйтесь, копейщицы! Копейщицы, приуготовляйтесь к брани!
did what they could.
Время действовать!
Pretty efficient priest you got there.
Идти надо на Москву, такой наказ есть. Восстаньте, воины!
In planning to face the horde, Dmitri had called upon a cavalry detachment to stage an ambush. He received word that his reinforcements had begun to arrive and bided his time for the right moment to call them to battle.
Готовы будете, воине! Исполнено будет. Сейчас.
Приток ворога! Ворог поражает!
Живу службы ради.
The two great armies clashed in the fog, but Dmitri's men stood firm. With the terror of the horde on their doorstep, Rus villagers once again rushed to construct more defenses, this time on the banks of the Don River.
Сейчас. Долг есть бремя. Ступайте, латницы, смелей! добродетель! Латницы наказа ожидаю! Готов, есть латницы! На коней садитесь! Живу службы ради!
Направляйте разумно!
И латницы готовятся! Служите ради! Готовы будете, воины! Служите, раб еду! Латницы наказа ожидаю! На коней садитесь!
Приготовляйте оружие! Оружие суть исправно! Ожидаем наказы! Оружие суть исправно! Ожидаем наказы!
Какой наказ есть?
The cavalry detachment was in position and waited for Dimitri's signal to strike. Dimitri saw his opportunity and called in the full force of his cavalry. This was his chance to ambush the unsuspecting enemy. The Mongol numbers dwindled as the Rus struck down their ranks. Seeking an even stronger position, Dmitri ordered his forces to fall back to the Don River, where his allies had constructed new defenses. As the Rus fell back, a fresh detachment of reinforcements joined the fight.
So I just have some fun setting up the very most efficient ones.
Латницы смели и готови суть. На коней, латницы! Всем приготовитесь надо. Будете надо на войне.
Храбрейших, поспешайте! Копия не суть тяжело.
Оружие суть исправно. Ожидаем наказ. Яко прикажете. Готов под святость освещает путь. Наказывайте. Братья, двигайтесь надо. На войне готови суть к брани. Следуй наказам быстро.
Копейщицы, яко прикажете. Примите знак, сестры.
Латницы наказа ожидают. Латницы наказа ожидают. Ой, не готовьте суть к брани.
Держите копья. Яко прикажете.
to the River Don, the Rus held their ground in a last stand against their ferocious enemy.
The cavalry, gonna go do cavalry things.
Проверяйте. Сейчас.
Oh, they're healers. Oh.
Выступайте доблестно, воины! Сейчас! Небеса укроют нас щитом!
In the last gasps of the desperate battle, the Rus would not back down. It would be victory or death.
Always, man. Healer cavalry, though? That's crazy. Thought the Mongolian horseplay was fun. Ow!
Живу службы ради. Исполнено будет. Приготовляйтесь, идем! Служите рад, если.
Dutch is surrounded.
For the first time in over 100 years of subjugation, the armies of the Rus defeated the Mongols in battle. For 3 days and nights, Prince Dmitri buried the fallen in the fields of Kulikovo. He became known as Donskoy, the victor at the River Don.
Swords and sabers.
The might of medieval Moscow was powered by strong arms and an unbreakable fighting spirit.
Fighting with a sword and shield, eye to eye in a gritty and brutal contest, was the European way. Swords in Moscow developed along the same lines as they did in Western Europe. This is a typical sword of around 1400. It's got a broad, double-edged blade, a simple crossguard, and this heavy pommel counterbalances the blade.
They were so well balanced that these powerful medieval swords were capable of being wielded with great speed and fluidity.
By the 14th century, Improvements in the manufacture of iron made it possible to fashion swords with longer blades. And swords like this, requiring 2 hands to wield, became more and more common on the battlefield.
They were called longswords, and they were used with sophisticated martial techniques.
It does have incredible and terrifying power.
Terrifying.
But there was another influence on Moscow. Moscow traded with the East, and Moscow fought with the East. And it was from the East that Moscow adopted the saber, with its distinctively curved blade. The curve on a saber blade gives a natural slice to the cut, so cutting deeper for less effort. These exceptionally light swords were first and foremost a horseman's weapon.
As a single-strike weapon, using the speed of the horse for impact, it was one cut onto the next.
But cutting wasn't their only use.
You're like counteracting the speed.
Even with
You
a
need to cut
curved blade,
with it.
you can still deliver an effective thrust.
However, for all their cavalry dash, the old ways of standing firm remained part of the Muscovy way. Forging a military culture that was a unique blend of West and East. On the morning of September 8, 1380, at Kulikovo, the Moscow-led Rus army defeated the Mongols for the first time. One of the key battles of the medieval age, it was a transformative event in the rise of Moscow as the future capital of Russia. For the first time, rival principalities had joined Moscow to fight a common enemy. Now, many Rus principalities began to see themselves as one. Future leaders of Moscow would draw on the memory of this battle to claim their supreme political position in Russia. Moscow's Grand Prince, Dmitry Ivanovich, had led the Rus principalities to victory over the Mongols, reinforcing his dominance. But for the Mongols' leadership, the defeat at the Battle of Kulikovo was disastrous. The ruler of their Golden Horde was overthrown by a descendant of Genghis Khan. His name was Toktamish. And Toktamish was not going to let the treacherous Moscow-led Rus get away with rebellion. 2 years after their defeat at Kulikovo, Toktamish's Golden Horde set out to attack Moscow. The city had not felt the wrath of the Mongols for more than a century. That was about to change. Racing to brace the gates of Moscow, Prince Dmitry and his army of Rus allies rushed into the fortified heart of the city. This would be the greatest test of Moscow's mighty stone walls. But could the capital hold out against the furious legion of the Golden Horde? The Muscovites had already faced many Mongol attacks on their city, and knew the Horde would arrive in
Чего
vast
делать
numbers.
надобно?
The race to fortify Moscow began.
Построено будет.
No trade. What's going on around here, though? Okay, okay. Okay, my lord. Nice hunting cabin. On your stone.
Готов, трудитесь, есть. Добывайте добро есть.
Смирно! Пока, стопки!
Я здесь.
Уразумели?
Стрела на тетиве есть.
Ополчение есть.
Готовы будете, воины. Надобно в путь идти.
Делить, что делаете? Двигаюся. Повелевать монахи. Выступать и надо. На Казинове суть. Напрям...
Люди, служите готове. Я построю сие. Дело есть. Готовы, трудитесь и есть. Рада есть. Рада есть. Начну трудитесь.
Лучник готов есть.
Копейщик есть.
As Dmitri urgently prepared the city's defenses, fleeing villagers from nearby towns flooded into Moscow, desperately seeking refuge from the rapidly approaching Mongol army.
Hello. Please. Sure, I can put you all to work. They're off. There's another stone deposit down here.
Брать будут. Яко угодно есть. Жаловайтесь нельзя.
Шанцы яко делайте.
Ополчение есть.
No traders. Using wood from those two out.
Чего делать надобно? Рады.
Готовы идти.
The refugees from the settlements surrounding Moscow had all arrived at the city. They would wait out the Mongol assault behind Moscow's stone walls.
Построено будет.
Работа ждет. Работа ждет. Я построю сие.
Wait, what? Oh.
Есть.
Тихо! Наказі нові суд!
Исправляйтесь. Напряжь. Исполняйте, чем. Стрела на тетиве есть.
Hearing the thunderous beat of the Mongol war drums on the horizon, Dmitri rallied his men to hold their ground. If the stone walls were breached, the city would fall.
Слушайте!
Лучник готов есть.
Приготовляйтесь все!
Лук готов есть.
Иду пораньше.
Воины, на браню готовляйтесь. Приходите, воины.
На казе будут. Настроено будет. Идем. Сие построю скоро. И як-то прикажете. Начинаю строить сейчас.
Я готов.
Наказ слушайте.
Что накажете?
Слушайте все. Надо в путь идти. Я построю. Сие построю скоро.
The Mongol torches made short work of Moscow's wooden palisades, and now the old stone walls were all that stood between Dmitri and defeat.
Построено крепко есть.
Готові будете, воїни! Повідуй!
Построено есть. Радость. Потрудился и зря.
The overpopulation caused burning out the sun.
Иди, труднице, надо в
Слушайте все. Надо на путь идти.
Ожидайте наказа. Наказ исполняем. Напрежь поскору.
устроено крепко есть.
Слушайте все.
Подкрывает пол!
Я построю сие.
Ожидайте наказов! Замечайте цель себе, лучницы!
Латницы наказа ожидают! Никто не жив будет! Поведу вы!
Готов, если потрудитесь.
Слушайте мой наказ!
Слушайте все. Исправляю. Сие исправим.
Послушание и есть добродетель. Приготовляйтесь, воины!
Оружие готово, и оружие на...
Наказ слушайте! Воины, напрежь поскорее! Лучницы, приготовляй тревожно есть! Приступайте! Делайте, яко велено есть, воины!
Наказ слушайте надобно.
Что накажете? Люди, приготовишься. Начинаю строить и сейчас.
Наказ тревожно есть! Приступайте!
Куда направляться? Слушайте все. Повинуйся наказу.
Трудитесь, надо. Иду, трудитесь.
Готово, если потрудитесь.
Какой наказ?
Нас поражает!
Небеса укроют нас щитом! Вас ждет победа! Одолевай! Расточаться, воротни!
Дайте мне работу. Значит, исправляйте. Исправляю! Сие исправим!
Латницы, на коней садитесь! за вороги!
Трудитесь, надо.
Слушайте все. Сие построю скоро.
Ой, не готовится, наступать и надобно! Латницы, на коней садитесь! Сейчас! Силы небесные! Латницы наказа! Идти надо по спору, таков наказ есть. Приготовляйтесь наказы исполнять. Выступайте доблестно, воине.
A new threat arrived at Moscow's gates. The Mongols rolled in their mightiest siege engines.
Лучницы, приготовляйтесь! Напрямик по скору!
Трудитесь надобно.
Готов ехать, служите.
Исправляю. Начну исправляйте! Начну исправляйте! Начну исправляйте!
Готов есть сейчас. Приготовляйтесь, наказы исполнять. Стреляйте! Поспешите! Путь надо! Готовицу! Слушание есть! Восстанете, воины!
With the heartbeat of Mongol war drums closing in, the Rus knew the horde would not relent.
Послушай, идти надо до Москвы. Таков наказ есть.
Ожидайте наказа, лучницы. Идите, лучницы!
Латницы наказа ожидают! Наступайте, латницы, смелее! Огонь, браты, есть! Приготовляйте оружие, слушаюсь! Товарищи, готов! Иду, куда наказано есть! Латницы готовы! Исполнено будет! Служите раб, если! Долг несть бремя! Все латницы готовы! Выступайте доблестно, воине!
Ожидайте наказа, лучницы! Ожидайте наказа, лучницы! Ожидайте наказа! Идите, лучницы!
Время действовать! Повинуюсь с честью! Смели готовиться! Выступайте доблестно, воине! Армейцы наказа ожидают! Повинуй!
Где трудницы надо? Люди, приготовляйтесь на наказа! Начну исправлять. Сие исправить.
Готовы будете, воине! Восстанете, воине! Посмотрите оружие! Наступаем! Латницы, на коней садитесь!
The Muscovites bravely held their capital in the face of an overwhelming Mongol onslaught. But now an even larger army had arrived on Moscow's doorstep. Running out of time, Dmitri ordered his army to hold back the Mongols long enough for Moscow's citizens to escape.
Выступайте доблестно, воине!
Ожидайте наказа! Ван Мю!
Что накажете? Сие исправим. Начну исправлять их. Исправляю. Сие исправим. Исправляю. Сие исправим.
Куда стреляли? Всеми остановка! Если служите! Сейчас! Приготовляйтесь! Готов повиноваться! Воини, наказы слушайте! Идем, воини! Восстанете, воины! Силатницы готовятся! Служите нам!
Dmitri and his men held the city, giving some of Moscow's citizens time to flee. But despite their steadfast defense, the Rus could hold out no longer, and the capital succumbed to the vast numbers of the horde. Toktamish Khan sacked the city, plundering its riches and slaughtering any Muscovites that remained. Prince Dmitri had no choice but to take flight, abandoning his home. Rus independence would have to wait.
That's alright, cheese.
Among both the armies of Moscow and the Golden Horde were strange-looking creatures. Grotesque, sinister faces that struck terror into a foe.
There's a very long history of making helmets with mask visors with human features in the ancient Near East. Moscow was heavily influenced by this metalworking tradition, using the art of embossing to hammer these extraordinary sculptural forms into the steel.
To make these masks required highly skilled artisans. In present-day Poland, Adam Mazier is a master of the craft. The process begins with a thick, flat sheet of wrought iron. The hammer stretches and domes the plate, the beginnings of a face. As the metal is pushed out, it becomes thinner and so easier to work. Adam marks a center point and an outline of the nose. This is the only guide he uses. All else is done by eye alone.
In Western Europe during the late Middle Ages, helmet design was all about function. What shapes are going to form glancing surfaces that make weapons skate and bounce away from the face? In Moscow, however, the approach was rather different. They sacrificed quite a lot of protection for the sake of extraordinary visual impact.
There is a limit to which the metal can be stretched, and so a slot is cut to allow the nose to be shaped. Released from the bonds of the rigid plate, the nose takes on its distinctive form.
In a way, armor is always a mask. It forces the world to see us as we want to be seen. Strong, powerful, indomitable. These Muscovite mask visors are an extraordinary example of that projection of identity. In some cases, they were actually made as portraits in the image of the wearer.
With every strike, the features become more and more recognizably human. The furnace imbues the mask with a warrior's fury.
When finished, the visor is given a high polish and attached to its helmet with this rotating hinge that allows the visor to be raised and stowed when not in use. But it can always be quickly lowered as soon as danger threatens.
A man could project his power with such a mask. A man could hide his fear with such a mask. And by doing so, he could be brave. In the century following the Mongols' vengeful attack on Moscow, Dmitry Donskoy's son and grandson clung to the Rus throne. Amid old rivalries and fragile alliances, Dmitry's great-grandson Ivan III set out to consolidate Moscow's control over all the Rus. But one independent republic would not yield to Moscow, the wealthy commercial center of Novgorod.
Gotta go get that Novgorod.
In the bitter winter of 1478, Ivan III arrived at the doorstep of the wealthy Republic of Novgorod, the last remaining independent Rus province. With his army of allied Rus forces, Ivan would not stop until Novgorod belonged to Muscovy. First, he had to take the outlying towns of Kuklino and Soltsi, which were guarded by resistance fighters.
Yep, sounds fun. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Alright. Yep. You sure? Oh, okay. And with that,